Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Tree Actions, the Human Forestry Podcast. And we've had an interesting session today already. This is our second startup with some technical glitches, but with me, as always, is Tony.
Good morning again.
And all the way from the deep woods of Kentucky, a good friend, Michael, the house, Tain. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, thanks, Michael, for driving to a spot where you get a little better connection for us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, that's I guess a new world of technology. So I might have to adapt and overcome a little bit here.
You're not the first person to do the podcast on our show from their vehicle, but you are the first that has spent an hour trying to find a connection that works. And it is also the first one that we've done on a Tuesday. Normally we do it on Mondays. So there's a bunch of firsts happening, but and those of you listening, obviously you don't know all this, but it's been an interesting morning. We've had a few startups and it's been fun, and we really appreciate your patience, Michael. So for the third time or something like that, without any further ado, and it sounds like a great story. I haven't been able to hear it in its in fluidity, but your first connection to trees.
Well, I would guess, on a childhood perspective.
Yes.
I grew up in a military family. We moved around a lot, and I was probably 6.5 years old, and we were stationed in upstate New York at a place called West Point. My dad was in the Army, and he was an instructor there. And we were in on-base housing, but it was a brand new. It had just recently been built for military families, and so there was no grass in the yards or anything like that. It was in the middle of the woods, and me and some buds, scavenged and probably borderline stole tools and wood and nails and stuff, and went out in the woods and climbed up in a tree, which at my advanced age, I have no idea what it was. But in any case, we climbed up in a tree and built sort of a ramshackle platform that, in retrospect, we're probably very lucky we didn't die. But that was our secret hideout, and we would retire there whenever we were in trouble or needed to hide from the authorities, so to speak. So,
Yeah.
so that was probably my first experience that I remember with trees. But, my family growing up, we did a lot of outdoor stuff, a lot of camping. We didn't call it hiking then. It was just, come on, we're going for a walk.
Yeah.
So we were outside a lot. And, at one point in between duty assignments, we went on what my dad called the Odyssey, where we traveled for 30 days in our Jeep Wagoneer with an old canvas tent and just camped at places along the way. And we were basically visiting relatives because he was from Michigan, my mama was from Georgia, so our relatives were spread all over the place. And of course, we were in the military, so we were always living different places.
Yeah.
So it was me and my two sisters and mama and daddy, and then our Belgian Shepherd he had built a little wooden box that the back of the Jeep Wagoneer stayed open, and that box went in there, and the dog stayed in there. So
The Odyssey. He called it the Odyssey.
He called it the Odyssey. Yeah, my dad was a big fan of the classics. So
It's that so that's iconic in the family today. That would be that era or that trip referred to as the Odyssey.
yeah.
Well, that's kind of cool. That's pretty cool, actually. When you described your tree fort, it made me think of the Little Rascals story, that the show and the book. I think even.
Yeah, they were much more charismatic than we were. There was one time we retreated to the tree fort because it was a recent construction. There were a lot of rocks around, and so with their rocks around, they're going to get thrown.
Right.
Sometimes at each other, and sometimes. I remember one time we decided it'd be fun to see how many rocks we could throw on top of the house. And in the process, we broke the transom window above the door.
Right.
And no parental units were around at the time. We got up on a little step ladder and put some duct tape over it, and then retreated to the tree house. And eventually had to come home out of hunger. And when we got home, our basic story was we don't know anything about it. I have no idea how it happened. So, deniability is always
correct. I would love to have been the fly on the wall, sitting in the. It's just such a typical movie scene almost. It's like you could see the window breaking, the haphazard repair, and then the retreat to the hideaway to discuss. What was the topic of conversation? Was it what happened, or was it quickly diverted to things of youth?
well, basically whether we would survive the repercussions of this incident. And if we felt like we weren't going to survive, what actions we should take to try to survive.
So what would what in those time, like, I know for me it conjures up a complete mental picture of what I would have surmised the consequences to be. I imagine being in a was it corporal in nature?
Yeah. In my family, corporal punishment was not frowned upon. So
Yeah, it's I think everyone's experienced that type of thing in youth, where you do something that was an honest enough mistake. It's an interesting concept I've recently has been brought to my light, or brought to my thought process of it's something that we carry through, or I've carried through, that many of us carry through into our adulthood, is being measured by our actions, or the consequence, rather than the intention, right?
yeah,
And in that you learn that it matters more. It matters less what you wanted to have happen, but more importantly, what actually did happen, whether it was a mistake or not. which isn't always the best thing, because you guys weren't trying to break the window; you were just having fun. But yet, you're going to pay the price for the action, that the result of what took place. So I don't know if that makes sense. And carrying that through into adulthood, it can cause you to feel guilty for things that maybe you shouldn't.
well, that I would agree with you, and I would also just extrapolate a little bit in that as a Irish American, or Irish American raised as a Catholic, um, guilt is one of the strongest tools. Guilt and shame both are extremely strong
Yes.
tools to be used. So
Well, they're fundamental, not just in Catholic background, but any devout faith-based group. There seems to be that component to it, and I think it is exerted to some degree to have control, or it does teach you to obey and follow rules, right?
yeah,
I think what you have to be careful about, what I'm trying to sort of heal in myself, or change in myself, is that is not to betray my intention. Just because I made a mistake, if I genuinely was trying to do my best, the mistake isn't necessarily the best way to judge what the outcome. If it was
exactly.
clumsily done, and I
Yeah.
know that's a big topic, but I don't know. It's
No, I would agree. The thing is that you know corporal punishment, however well intended, um, just having the consequences of your action doesn't really explain to you why that action shouldn't have been taken in the first place. you know,
yeah.
it
Yeah.
sort of gives a wrong message, a bad message, I guess.
And along with that, the fact that most of us, most, and could be argued that all have the best intention, or at least doing the best we can with the information and situation at hand, including our parents, which they literally believed that was the best thing to do. In the court, I was also corporal punishment, or what, spare the rod, spoil the child, was definitely in my home. And that's what they believed was the right thing to do. At the same time, for them, their intentions, even though their actions. So I got to be careful not to repeat it.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. It's typically most of the time, although, there's certainly folks out there that are just, evil at their core, but most of the time it's with the best of intentions. They're trying to help,
Exactly.
and it has consequences beyond what they intended, I guess.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And that's been a bit of a new concept for me, and I don't have my head totally wrapped around it, but that's okay. Now, I know you well, so I know some of your stories. So I don't want to. I guess the direction you moved into. You mentioned your first memory being a youth in trees, suggesting that you have other memories that and connections, feelings of connection. So, you know, after that, having the tree fort and all that, when was the next time that you felt a connection to a tree, or where you had some meaningful experience that occurred?
Well, I mean, if I'm to be honest, um, being outside in trees um, have always been part of my life, both personally and professionally. Um, so I cannot think of a time where trees weren't something that was in my life. Even when I
Wow.
was in the military, and perhaps Tony can relate to this. Um, in the Marine Corps, we'd be out in triple canopy stuff in Thailand or the Philippines or Okinawa. So triple canopy jungle, and it's not as well when it's night. It's darker than you can imagine. But even during the day, there's never really a whole lot of light down on the forest floor. Um,
Right.
so you're always surrounded by trees. And when you're in an infantry unit like I was, the areas of most danger are open areas, and you actually call them danger areas because then you're exposed.
Right.
Um, so the place you felt the most comfortable was when there are a whole lot of fucking trees around you, man, because
Yeah.
that's a safe place. You come to an open area, whether it's a stream or a creek or maybe just a little opening in the canopy. Um, you actually set out security and you cross it very carefully because that's when you're exposed.
Right.
Um, or if you're crossing a trail, you got security on both sides. You send security across on your flanks, and then you try to get across it as rapidly as possible.
Right.
Um, so, like, you're out there for 30 days, 45 days, or whatever. The helos come in, they pick you up, they fly you back to base or wherever, and now all of a sudden everything's open area, and you're like, "What the hell? This is all danger," you know.
Yeah.
Um, but anyway, my point is that throughout my life, um, there's two places I feel, I guess, like safe, like my safe places,
Right.
and or I feel most comfortable, perhaps. And one is in the forest and in trees, or with trees around me, and
Yeah.
the other is in the water, in the ocean, and
Okay.
that's all because of experiences. Um,
Right. Right. Right.
in the Marine Corps, at certain times, the place you were going to get extracted from or get away was to get to the ocean. You needed to get to the water.
Right.
Um, so those are my happy places, I guess. Um, and trees are a big part of that. The forest being around me. That doesn't mean that I'm uncomfortable when I'm in the desert or when I'm in the open or whatever. But I'm not in my happy place. There's too
Right.
much exposure. So,
Right. Yeah, it makes sense.
and I
Interesting.
think you could probably, I mean, if you really want to dig deep, maybe you could trace that all the way back to my childhood, where the place, me and my buds retreated to was the forest. You know,
Yeah.
um, so
Well, do you feel that that trios provided you that? Like it actually gave you that feeling of protection.
well, yeah, to a certain extent. I mean, I was lucky enough to have what I consider um, a good childhood. I wasn't I wasn't raised in a home or in a family where I lived in fear about going home, or it was a scary place to be or anything like that. But I think, especially as a child and even as an adult, people need to have places um,
Hmm.
where they can retreat to and just be with their own thoughts and be in a comfortable place. And for me as a child, you know, that was going to the woods, either with my buds or by myself.
Yeah.
And it wasn't necessarily because I was scared, but it was a place where I was autonomous. It was me, you know.
Hmm.
Um, I didn't have to answer to anybody. Um, I could just be by myself and with myself, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Absolutely does. It made me think of, we had a shelter belt that went around the farm property, and it was actually, and I think back on it, it was a pretty established. Well, it was established, but it was also quite well done. Like it was layered. It had Manitoba maple, Carigana, and then there was even some spruce and poplar. So like it had it. When as a young person, I could go in there, and I'd make forts, so to speak, out of deadfall that you'd stack and up against the trunk of a tree. Typical kid stuff.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
at that age, you really felt like you created something where you could that was yours and where you could hide in. And what came to my mind while you were talking is there's a lot of contemplation, in that stage, and I don't know how old I would have been, quite young, but and the things you would notice, like bark texture and insects and leaves, and just there was no end of fascinating things to look at that gave you pause to ponder, and you could get lost in it for
yeah,
long,
yeah.
indeterminate amounts of time.
All that sensory input coming into you, and I think that one of the things for me, and I notice it with the grandkids, is that that's one of the things I think that as adults, and I don't know whether it's our culture, our system, or whatever, but as adults, um, that's sort of suppressed in us when we go out.
Hmm.
And so, like when I go out with the grandkids, um, sometimes we'll squat down and we'll watch ants for like 15 minutes. And I remember doing
Yeah,
that as a kid. Or we'll be walking along, through the woods, and they'll say, "Oh, Pop, come look at this," and it'll be a really cool mushroom. But if I was just out trying to get my steps in, I wouldn't paid any, attention to it.
yeah.
Um, and I think it's important. And I try to remind myself, and obviously with the grandkids, I've got a built-in reminder. But I try to remind myself when I'm out, that maintaining or retaining that that childhood sense of all those different things there are to see and observe and experience is really important. And I think not only important from the sense of gaining knowledge or gaining information or learning about, well, having situational awareness, whatever you want to call it, but also
Hmm.
from the sense of realizing the really small role we play in this big system, and how
Yeah,
there's stuff going on around us all the time that's making everything work, man. you
yeah,
know and we're
yeah.
just a one little molecule floating around in there, bouncing off all these other things. So
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And I think it partly ties back to uh, the intention and the measurement of intention versus consequence or action. Because um, as you grow up, you're taught the importance of efficiency, of discipline, and I think that causes us to, like, you get the idea that sitting and looking at a mushroom or something fascinating, especially if you're at work, is not efficient. It's a waste of time, and so you betray something that's natural within ourselves. And it's like it's like you come to believe that something that's quite natural and even important to us as people. Like, even
hmm
saying it, I feel weird saying it because it's like it's appropriate for grandchildren. It's appropriate for children, but like here we are as adults trying to, yeah, I need to learn to do it more, but we'd probably I find myself tempering that because I can't be childish, and yet at the same time, why do we view that as negative or something? Like, why not sit and look at ants still and be fascinated by them, or blow the seeds off of dandelions and think it's the
yeah.
coolest thing ever, right? you know
Well,
and,
but
and
like if
yeah,
you look at it in the bigger picture, you know, 2,000 years ago, and in some places less than that, looking around and knowing what was going on was integral to survival.
right, yeah,
You know, the only reason we're worried about efficiency and going around about things the best way is because we built all this shit, that regulates our life.
yeah.
But 2,000 years ago, if you weren't paying attention, you were going to get at, man. There, there wasn't gonna be heat that night. There wasn't gonna be shelter. There
Yeah.
weren't any fruits to eat, no berries. Um, so knowing what was going on around you was the be all end all. You know, not your Facebook status or how many people are following you on the gram or something. You know,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and so for me, um, yeah, we use childish to describe it, but
Right.
that's just because of where we are right now as a culture and a society.
Correct.
The reality is what we should use to describe it is human, because being able to do that is what allowed us as a species to survive and get to where we are right now. It's our
Yeah.
humanity, not our childishness. You
Yeah.
know.
And it just struck me, like, within the business of tree work, especially, I think it's probably one of the first things that, you know, for me, and I think for a lot of people, is the attraction of when you're up in it, like when you realize you can make a living or you can get paid, maybe you're up there, you're doing a job, but when you get up in a tree and you're getting started, and even while you're working like that, you're in a separate world almost, right? You're in that, and a
Oh
place
yeah,
of, like, you can pause and look at the leaf or that insect, because I mean, no one's going to come up there and say, "What are you doing?" Like, you're up there. Once you're up there, you're up there. You're in that place, and you
yeah.
can recapture some of that youthfulness, I think.
Well, and also I would add that um, doing tree work, if you're doing production tree work, those powers of observation are once again integral to your survival.
Yeah.
So if you're just up there checking the boxes, you ain't gonna be doing it that long before something bad happens, man.
Yeah.
you know
No, that's
because
right.
one of the things that's always struck me is people say, oh well, that's a poplar to do this and this, or that's an oak to do this and this, and I'm like, yeah man, but you know I'm a homo sapien, you're a homo sapien, but I could have a heart attack and you could have cancer. Just because the same species doesn't mean it's going to act the same way.
No.
And so if you don't use those powers of observation or whatever you want to call them, you know, not to be rude, but bad shit going to happen. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. Yeah.
and you're probably going to be involved. So
Yep. I agree. I'm curious what our philosopher Stone has to say on this one. But Tony, with at some point in these conversations, I'm going to defer to the oracle.
Yeah, I think that that like just paying attention and taking time to do those stuff that it's so important. I joke around a lot when we get together and we talk, like, you're never going to be on your deathbed and say, "Oh man, I wish I'd have worked Wednesday," right? Or words are never going to come out of mouth is like, "Man, I should have put in more hours in front of my computer." When you look at it in perspective, you're gonna that time you spend with the grandkids' house is like, you can't trade that, right? Those are the things that you'll miss, right? Like,
Yeah.
you're not going to sit there and go, "Man, I should have spent an extra this cleaning the garage," right? Damn, I should have cleaned the garage that Wednesday. I shouldn't have went out and stared at a mushroom. So I think keeping it in perspective is good too. And I find too that it's like, my father had a really good work ethic, and I came to realize, probably after he passed away, my father worked real hard. That was his coping mechanism, right? When things were tough for my dad, and he just worked harder, and I took that as the way to do it. And it took me a while to figure out that, yeah, I might be just sitting on my back deck having a cold beverage, and I might not be doing anything, but under the surface in my brain, I need that time to step back and process, right? And that retreat, that kind of come back. And it's why it looks like I'm doing nothing. And maybe if Maggie and I go for a walk and we're checking out cool mushrooms and really prehistoric looking bugs, maybe nothing's getting accomplished, right? No money is being earned or no projects are being completed. But one, I'm spending that time because it's important. And two, when I get back to work, because I don't mind working, I like my job, I like what I do, I have a new perspective because I gave myself that leeway, that open space, that white space in my mind to kind of let it drift together. And I found that, I've said this before a couple times on the podcast, when I stopped doing tree work full time, when I wasn't climbing trees every day, I needed to find other ways to get that white space. So I had to take up a little bit of a meditation practice, because I was doing that at work in a tree, right? Like, yeah, I was aware and I'm moving and I'm going through, but when you get really competent at something, especially a physical activity like moving through a tree, it gets easy to fall into that flow state. And then my mind was kind of starting to process on other things as well too. And when that was gone, I missed it. Right. So I've learned to appreciate that. It might look like I'm not doing anything, but something's happening, right?
Yeah.
I look at that type as it's as necessary to me in my mental and spiritual health as sleep is, right? Like, it's that vital to me that I have to take time to make that space, that open space, that white space, whatever you want to call it, so that the other things, it keeps me from getting antsy, ramped up, trying to get too much. I get more done sometimes by not doing anything, right? Like by giving the champ to rest.
Yeah, there's definitely something to be said for something new in my life is having a better ability or capacity for patience, uh, and how things, you hear people talk about. I used to hear people talk about, well, yeah, I didn't really know what, they're trying to fix something or they're trying to, but in their new way of living in recovery from addiction, particularly, they they have the ability to pause, and in that the solution shows up or happens. And I've always not quite believed that. I was always kind of like, yeah, that sounds like maybe that works for you, but I don't really believe that. But I've experienced that more, like having the ability to. There's something in the. I don't know if it's tied with energy or what, but when you're faced with a physical challenge like trying to take a oil filter off a tractor, or whether you're you know trying to connect with a relationship that's been damaged from past things, having a time to pause and think and really not really do anything but have an open mind and let the energy flow, like both a solution that presents itself, that making it happen, taking action, rather than focusing on your intent doesn't work very good. You end up with like skin knuckles and busted things, and at least that's
Yeah.
what happened to me, right? Whether it be a busted wrench and oil filter, or and it's still on the tractor, or whether it's a relationship,
Yeah.
and yeah, but when we talk about these sorts of things, I always wonder about, we're in a similar demographic age wise, and how much of this is a function of that. Because when I was 25, would I even have the capacity for this? I don't know. And maybe that's just life. The like Michael, your reference to what you're aware of, like when you're in that, I don't know, 25 to 45, you're pretty focused on family life, maybe children, maybe like there's a lot of things that really seem to dominated my attention. I don't know if you guys found that.
Yeah. I think given once again, our culture and our system,
Right.
that's, I don't want to say pushed upon us, but to succeed in the system, you got to follow the rules of the system.
Right. It's by design.
Yeah, and once again, that in the lifetime of humanity, that's a very pretty recent development. Um, and I think there's opportunities, to maybe succeed in the system, but still have that ability to observe and be with yourself and what's going around. But it's not easy, and the system is telling you you shouldn't be doing that. You should be
Right.
answering emails at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
Um, and you should be, if you're not working, then you should be doing something that's going to advance you at work. Whether it's online classes or training or whatever like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And that's reinforced again and again. Um, so, but I don't know, in my mind at least, and from what research I've seen, sort of on this general topic, um, that's a created structure.
Yeah.
But what's inside of us um, needs something different.
Right.
And like you look at the results from like forest bathing and stuff like that, and its effects on people's stress and anxiety and blood pressure, or just the simple addition of some green space to urban areas and what it does to the levels of domestic violence and crime and stuff like that. And you realize, we're creatures of nature. Um, and no matter how much we build up and we create these systems and we have these apps that do everything, that doesn't change our hardwiring that's inside, that's
Right.
evolved over millions of years.
Yeah.
Um, you can throw all the software you want at it, but that hardwiring is the same. You know?
Yeah, it's when we're in those age, 25 to 45 is when our pod is most productive in the matrix.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. But in the matrix, when you get past a certain point, you're sort of just flushed, right? And we're there. They definitely uh, depicted death in a very crude fashion in that movie. There was one part that was kind of gross. It's like you literally were kind of flushed. Wow, that is I never thought of that. That it's a function of a designed system that I like that perspective.
Well, there's a book called The Comfort Crisis, and then he followed it up with one called Scarcity Brain. His name is Michael Easter, I think. Um, and basically he talks to a whole lot of different scientists and different professional sources. And sort of the thesis of it, pretty crudely, of the comfort crisis is we evolved and we're designed to be uncomfortable. Um, that's what humans have been forever. Um, and now we're in a place where we're always comfortable. We hit a dial on the wall and the temperature goes to what we want. Um, we need to go 40 miles. We get in the car and we drive 40 miles or whatever. Um, and there's some some pretty good research that shows that the more comfortable we get, the more anxiety and stress we have in our lives.
Wow.
Because there's no challenges. Our brain needs challenges. Our body needs challenges. Our spirit needs challenges. Um, and he's not saying everybody should go out and lay on the dirt and sleep in the rain or whatever. But as a restorative process, getting outside, moving around, um, being uncomfortable at times, or being just in situations that are challenging, that will help restore your spirit and your emotional health. It's pretty interesting. You guys should check it
Yeah.
out.
Well, and it makes sense. They're um, certainly in the recovery model, like that you hear the term rock bottom, and it's an extreme state of discomfort that is usually people that experience the most change or have long term results from in the recovery model had a really profound rock bottom, some that like extreme discomfort, to because that's the only thing that causes change. Like if you're comfortable, you're not going to change, right?
Yeah,
Like that applies to anything. Like like why would you change something if it's not uncomfortable? Like if your back isn't sore, you're not going to move it. You're not going to adjust it. It's like if your foot isn't itchy, you aren't going to scratch it, right? It's the fundamental thing to change. It's the one part of the yeah. Anyways, that's interesting. Um, um, I know you've had a quite an interesting career, and it wasn't always in the trees. There was the foray with the military, which you touched on, and how even I didn't realize that trees were a part of that as well. Until now, that you felt protected, that you were undercover in
yeah.
the forest. But then, how did it transition into actual trees,
Well,
like tree
because
work?
since my MOS, or my military occupational specialty, was infantry, um, it didn't really set me up for a lot of job options when I got out.
Okay.
The military is like any organization. It's got everything from clerks to air traffic controllers to logistics people, to pilots. Um, but my job was basically carrying around heavy loads with a weapon and shooting at things and blowing shit up. And that at that time, that was a hard job to find in the civilian world. So I knew I wanted to be outside. Um, I didn't have any interest in working inside. Um, so when I got out, I started working landscaping. And the landscape company I was working for was contracting with a tree company to do the tree work on the different properties we did. And they knew that I was doing on my off time, I did a lot of rock climbing and mountaineering and stuff.
Okay.
And they're like, you use ropes and harnesses, you should be able to do this. And, you're young and dumb. And I was like, oh, yeah, sure, we'll give it a try. So, started out, using completely dynamic ropes and my little rock harness, and um, did a lot of things that probably should have died doing. Um, and then moved out west, out to Washington State, um, and wanted to. My plan was to go back to college. Um, so I wanted to establish residency, so I'd pay in state.
Right.
So for that first year, I started working for a guy. He had a crab boat. We did halibut and Sorry, guys. There's a truck apparently is idle right next to me. So I had a crab boat. So we were working Dungeness crab and halibut fishery.
Yeah.
And then in the off seasons, he was a logger. So started doing that. The crab boat is what got me into splicing.
Okay.
Learned how to splice 3-strand. And then logging, we had like maybe a 5-man crew. I started out as a choker setter. Didn't see a hard hat the whole time or chaps the whole time I was there. The kind of crew, like at lunch, we'd sit around at lunch and there'd be like a 12-pack of beer, and guys would tell stories about how they got this scar, got that scar, or whatever like that. Lots of guys like, yeah, I lost this, in '65, and yeah, so I was working logging, and like I said, it was pretty rough and ready crew, and then I heard about some training that was out there uh, called Arbor Master, and so I talked to the guys I worked with, and they're like, "Training? What do you need training for? You work with us, you know." I'm like, "Well, I just want to see if something else is out there." And of course, like in the first 3 hours, even probably less than that, realized that I was lucky to be alive. Um, and then that's when I met James Luce, and got more into uh, training and more into the arborist side of tree work.
Yeah.
And then I've been doing that for 30 something years now, going on 40, I guess. So, and along the way, work for you guys up there in Arbor Canada, work for Arbor Master, work for Nats, um, work for utilities, and work for cities doing municipality, work for some private companies, worked as a consultant for like Cheryl Tree, and wrote for a while for what was it, Arbor Age, and what was the other one, Tony?
Tree Services magazine, I think.
Yeah, Tree Services. Wrote monthly columns for both of them for a while.
Yeah.
And got interested in sort of the medical side of things, and so went to street and wilderness EMT school. Got certified in that, and that sort of, I don't know if you'd say lit a fire, but made me realize that a lot more could be done for tree people regarding field medical care and field medical treatment.
Yeah.
Designed some courses for that I've taught a few times. And then at the ripe old age of 48, went back to college and became a nurse. And I've been working in, emergency and trauma nursing since then. I still, in between, I've done some stuff with Nats and with some other companies, and still do some contract tree work, but not as much as I used to. Still splice, more for entertainment than anything else.
Right.
So right now I work as an emergency nurse. I traveled a while nursing, working different hospitals around the country, and then I did a couple years in Iraq and Kurdistan as a contract nurse over there. So now I just puttering along in the fourth quarter of life.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and weren't you one of the you did a little bit of tree sitting as well back in the day? You're one of the first.
Yeah, I did some tree sitting out in Washington State to try to save. It was actually just a couple of, they were noble firs, but they were big noble firs, and they wanted to do an office expansion at this place, and my thought was, why don't you redesign the office rather than cut down these trees? So I sat in them for a day to stop them from doing it, and then the next day, I got down out of the tree because I just was trying to bring publicity to it. I didn't plan on staying up there for 60 days or, being like Butterfly or anything like that. So the next day they brought in James Luce to take him down. And I worked the ground for him to take down the very trees I had tried to save. So,
that wasn't how you met?
it was,
Was that how you got to work with James first?
oh no, I knew James for a while at that point.
Okay.
We had worked together, but it's funny because the newspaper showed up because they had been there the day before when I was sitting. Then they showed up the day we were taking him down. They're like, "Hey, aren't you the dude that was sitting at him yesterday?" And I was like, "Yeah." And they said, "Well, how's it make you feel to be sitting yesterday, take him down today?" I don't think they quoted me, but I was basically like, "How the fuck you think it makes me feel?" But from my perspective, I was one of the few guys around that had worked with James and knew how to work the ground with him, taking down big trees. So for me, my relationship and my love of James outweighed my concerns about the trees. And at that point, I mean, I'm a very pragmatic person. Yeah, I didn't want the trees to come down, but at that point, it was pretty clear that my pleas had fallen on deaf ears. They weren't going to redesign the office, so the trees are coming down. So I want them to come down as safely as they can.
Right. Yeah. You mentioned James a couple times now, and obviously, I'm sure we would have had James on the show, but that's not possible. I don't know if you're willing, or I didn't plan on this, but maybe we could delve into a little bit into the bring James into the show a little bit here through your eyes and your perspective. I don't know many people that knew him as long or as well. I mean, there's a lot of us that knew him well and loved him, but you probably had the longest time, and literally even like walking him through his final ascent, as he called it.
Yeah. I was with James when he passed, and was there for the process. But James and I had been part of each other's lives for, at that point, 20 to 30 years. James was a very, very interesting, talented, beautiful man. He was one of those people that could put his hand or his mind to almost anything and succeed at it. Very accomplished musician, very deep thinker, as far as being able to understand and convey complicated thoughts and ideas. Amazing athlete. Everything from rock climbing, backcountry skiing, kayaking, tree climbing, mountain biking, and also somebody who took a real joy in like we were talking about earlier, the wonders and the beauty of nature. Yeah. Like James and I, when we'd go on hikes, if we weren't careful, we'd be out for like 2 hours and we'd travel, less than half a mile because we'd keep seeing a plant or an insect or something or a rock, and we'd stop and look at it and talk about it and stuff like that. And the other thing about him, it was, at least in my experience, is that he loved sharing all that stuff with others. All those experiences, all that knowledge. He had an elevator set up in a big Doug fir in the back of his house for folks that couldn't climb. When they'd come and visit, he'd get them up in the trees. Yeah. He had multiple, small kid-sized harnesses. His nieces and nephews all ended up climbing at one point or another. you know, if he was getting ready to go do Mount Baker or something like that, and there was somebody that had, you know, never even been on a glacier before, he'd say, "Hey, you want to go?" And he would set them up with all the gear, and we'd get them out
Yeah.
there. Um, and same with kayaking and whatever. I mean, he was a very giving, uh, generous man, but he part of it was that he took so much joy and pleasure in being outside and doing stuff. He wanted everybody to experience that same joy and pleasure,
Yeah.
I guess.
And even James, like he got like part of the way he got there was through some hardship of his own, right? Like he went through a period of, from what he told me, where he found the gift of life through some adversity.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, he grew up in a military family like me, a big military family, um, and he had, you know, had had some hard times, but he'd gotten, you know, and he was still, when he died, he was still going
Oh yeah,
strong, man. I mean, he hadn't slowed down at all. He's probably one of the most, you know, fit people I've ever
yeah,
met as far as physical
yeah,
fit, health. Probably one of the most fit people I ever met in person.
yeah.
You know, and just a joy to be around. Yeah.
I agree. I agree. And I know I always, you know, training with them and I did a lot of training with James and spent time with James, and I always found it, or I still find it somewhat ironic, that learning a lot from him, and not just tree stuff, but life stuff. I probably learned more life stuff, and in the end, absolutely more life stuff, because I've said it many times. Not only did James teach me a lot about how to live, but he in the end taught me how to actually friggin' die. I never had anyone in me like it was a lesson in that. I never had anyone demonstrate or go through a period where there was with such intention. There was such purpose. It was such a purposeful
Yeah.
act that you couldn't help but
Yeah.
and having that last conversation with them, even like knowing where this is all going. I just had never experienced anything like that with anyone else before. I don't think anyone else. I mean, it's not very common,
No, it's not. It's not common. No, I'd gone through it to a certain extent with
right?
Bruce, um, but the way James described it, I think it was a very apt description, and he described it this way at the time. Was he said, you know, the you go to a funeral and you bring flowers. He said, the way I'm doing it, you hand me the flowers right here, and I say thank you, and we talk
Yeah,
about it. Um, and it was a wonderful way to do it. Um, you know, given the situation and the decisions, you know, that he and his wife Beth had made, um, you know, it was. I don't know another word to describe it other than beautiful. It was obviously very hard, and very emotionally wrenching for me personally. Um, but it was beautiful, man. It was just beautiful. So,
you wherever you moved your phone to, Mike, it must have inhibited your connection. Yeah, like
okay, I
I
was
know
trying to get it.
it's changed position. There you go. Put
Is
it
that
back
better
in the
now?
sun. Yeah, it is. It was weird. It was just wherever you put it, it just caused just that one little bit of interference. You were describing
Okay.
um, what you uh, experienced from it, or what you learned from it. Sort of, I can't remember exactly.
Yeah. So I would agree with you that I had experienced it to a certain extent going through it with Bruce,
Yeah,
um, because Bruce had made uh, a similar decision. Um, with the you know with Bruce there was an actual time and stuff like that, but he had a chance to talk to people and talk to his family and stuff.
right.
But James, James, it was, you know, uh, very intentional. And the way he described it to me, he said, you go to a funeral, you bring flowers. Um, what I'm doing is you can bring the flowers and you can put them in my hand, and then we can talk about, our relationship and life and everything like that. Um, and in my mind, there's no way to describe it but beautiful, both
Yeah.
to watch and to be a part of. Um, it was obviously very emotionally wrenching for me personally, but it was also beautiful at the same time.
Yeah.
And I think that the decisions that James and his wife Beth had made and how they carried them out were amazingly powerful.
Yeah.
And I think it had an impact on a lot of other people. But I mean, James had a lot of impact on a lot of other people throughout his life.
Yeah.
And that was just the final chapter, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I'm sure, we haven't said it directly, but in both cases, we're talking about individuals that had an illness or a health situation that you know that they chose to make the decision on how they left this world, basically, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And it's another interesting topic that getting back to the era that we live in. If you go back 1,000 years, like you were talking earlier, Michael, or even not that long ago, like these weren't even really options or decisions that most people had to make or could make in the same way that we can today, because of all the comforts that we have.
yeah, yeah. Well, and it wasn't that long ago. I mean, even I can um, in my grandparents' time, you know, people died at home with their families around
Yeah.
them. And I can even remember when I was very young, um, going to wakes, Irish wakes, where the body was laid out in the house with the pennies on the eyes and everything like that.
Yeah.
That was just the way they did it. And everybody was there talking about who they were and what they were. And there's I think one of the things we've sort of lost as a society is some of the ceremonial features or ritual features that have to do with the stages of life.
Yeah.
And I think having a ceremonial connection or a ritual connection to something like death and somebody you love passing is important. It's important for all of us.
100%. Yeah, I had it described. A friend of mine got into working at the hospice, volunteering at a hospice, and then now he gives talks on on the process of death, and it's interesting that exactly what you said. It used to be part of the family. It was just part of what happened. And it would be quite common to have it happen at home, and even that the family would prepare the body or clean it up and dress it, and that was all part of the process of letting go, and it was all and it was just the way it was. And now that's been completely sterilized from families. And like we still have the birth, right? Like you said, like we celebrate this birth, and you come in, but everybody leaves for the most part in a like, oh, you don't need to see that, well, and then you go see them afterwards, and we're missing something, and it's probably in some ways affecting us as either a fear of death is greater, or we just lose the gift, the beauty of that process that you described, right? Like, and James brought that back into focus for me, and I don't know how I'll be able to navigate that, but also Bruce as well, right? Like both those individuals made the choice in different circumstances, but nonetheless, it wasn't they had agency in their actual death.
Yeah. Well, an agency in their death, but also, in my mind at least, and maybe maybe it wasn't the same for some other people. I can't say, but in my mind, with both of them, they had agency in the manner of their death, but they also, through that agency, helped others, or at least
Right.
helped me with their death and their passing. Um, death is never easy, but being able to have that last, conversation, or that last uh, eye contact with somebody.
Yeah.
I can't say it makes it all better, but it also, at least for me, made it an easier process.
I think it brings consciousness to it. Like there's an awareness and a consciousness to it. It's a connect. It actually brings a connection to it, and without that, the connection's not there. Even though it's an ending, but it's a clear ending. It's a distinction. It's a connection to that. Like you turned it off, so to speak. As weird as that sounds, I think that's one of the things about maritime disasters, right, or fatalities on the water where they just don't come back. You don't have that, and that's why they build those touchstones and those monuments in shores and in harbors, because they got to have some. You have to have some connection to that person's passing, right? And when you can actually have it in reality and in real time, and I think it's a part of maturity. It's a part of understanding life, and I think there's a lot of fear and apprehension about that last journey, which is a step we all have to take. Tony, I don't know, what your thoughts are on the process and maybe what you learned. I mean, both the individuals and experienced it yourself. How was it for you?
Yeah, both with Bruce and James, having known them and worked with them, it was eye-opening for me. I don't, if you could turn back the clock and do things differently, I might have handled it a little differently, because both those situations kind of opened little boxes for me, that I don't think I was quite ready to deal with at that point. So I learned in retrospect, I think, and being led by an example like that's always a good thing. But it wasn't an easy time for anybody, at all. But I think I would have dealt with it a little differently looking back now, but I didn't. That's fine. I'm not going to beat myself up over it, but I learned from it. Even to this day, I'm not exactly sure what I learned. I learned a lot of lessons about how short life can be pretty early in life. So I had a pretty good appreciation for that, and it scoped my life around. And saying goodbye has always been kind of difficult. So yeah, it's difficult to see that. And I think what it made me appreciate, and even just this discussion, is, like I said, that importance of ritual. I can't tell you how many times doing safety training, I was like, I'll say it all the time: funerals aren't for the dead, right? Marriages aren't for the couple, and funerals aren't for the dead. Um, so, but to have that sort of ritual around it, is because people come into your life and people leave your life. Sometimes that's through death, sometimes that's through distance, sometimes just through whatever, right? Change of whatever. But the doors open, doors close. It's just the way it is. And I think what I learned from both those men was when those doors close, to take those opportunities, right? And there's opportunities I didn't take that I maybe could have, maybe should have. I don't know. I'm not going to should all over myself about it. But it's just that it would have handled it a little differently, and maybe next time when the situation comes around, because inevitably it will, right? Everybody is going to be gone, and then you'll be gone too. So it will happen again. So yeah, it's interesting. It was difficult times for me. I think it made me sort of get very introspective, more so than usual, which is setting the bar pretty high for me. And I don't even know if I've totally processed the whole part of it yet or not. That's fine too. All in time.
Yeah. I don't know where I'm speaking more on just the journey right now of passing. And for some reason in the last while, I would say in the last few months, for some reason, it's come into my thought of that, the birthing process and coming into this world, there's a journey of sorts, that we go through literally, and being exposed to, our lungs filling with air for the first time, and the light hitting our eyes, and that whole, just, you know, I don't remember it, but if I could, I imagine it would have been somewhat a bit. I don't think it's I don't think it's an exciting, fun venture, traveling through the birth canal and popping out into the world. I imagine there's a certain amount of trauma associated with it, of sorts, and I'm wondering about death. If it's like, if it's a similar thing, and the outcome is also quite, in the end, wonderful. I have a feeling it's more like that than not. It just seems to make sense to me, and that there's just my own mind musing here, of course. Thanks for indulging me. You can turn off if you want, those listening, but and to have fear and doubt around it is part of that. What we very first talked about. It's part of that. We lose the curiosity of the journey, and we worry about the the actions, and not the intention, um and it's trained into us, that we need to fight to live and survive, and yet it's just to me, I think, I'm starting to believe and have faith and comfort in it, that it's moving to a new dimension. And James even maybe was the first where I got an inkling of this, where he described, and I talked to him the hours, less than 24 hours before he passed,
Yeah,
about he felt like he was climbing,
yeah,
almost to climb out of the canopy.
yeah, I
He'd
do.
been ascending through the tree, and he was about to exit the top. That's how he described it. I don't know if you remember that, Michael, but which I found just wild. Like, imagine climbing the biggest tree of your life, and that's death, and you get to that final tree, and you're going to climb out the top, and you don't know exactly, but you're not like that's the next journey that we don't none of us know till we get there, right? And having someone to talk about it that way, because he didn't talk about it in fear. He didn't talk about it, and I wouldn't say he was stoked and happy, but although at the same time he had peace of some sort, there was something there. I don't know if it was interesting.
Well, I think he'd gotten to a place of contentedness. Um, like you said, you're not wasn't necessarily
Yeah,
happy and stoked about it, but he wasn't scared about it either. He'd gotten to the place that um, it is what it is, and I'm gonna enjoy this as much as I can while
yeah,
I'm going through it. You um, it's very to me it's very much like you got a huge takedown to do or whatever. It doesn't matter how much you whine and scream
yeah.
about it; it's still got to get done. You know, so you might as well enjoy it as much when you're
Well, I think
doing
it's
it.
a function of attitude, and your choice in how you choose to go through it or live it. And that, I think, what was impressive about that was, or what to me, what I learned and what blew my mind, I think, was the intention in which he chose to go through that. And just for those listening, if it was, James had an accident that left him, I guess, pretty much. Well, maybe you can describe it better, Michael. What exactly happened?
It was a mountain biking accident. Actually, just a relatively. It was an easy ride. It wasn't a challenging ride. He was actually taking a friend out for an easy ride and just happened to hit his front wheel on a rock or a root wrong and got thrown over the front and basically was paralyzed from the neck down
Yeah,
instantaneously. Um, and they tried one surgical measure to repair it with no results. Um, and then he made the decision to enter hospice and do a program that's called VSED, which is voluntarily
yeah,
stopping eating and drinking. Um, which under hospice is allowed. Um, and basically decided that he was going to end his life on his own terms. Yeah.
And what we're talking about is that your witnessing of that process and our experiencing. I only had a phone conversation, but I didn't go visit him. But he mentioned too about the letters and the phone calls and the conversations that he would have never had he not you know done this. Like, it was, everyone knew, and over those weeks and times, he had this month-long funeral, that and he was able to interact and speak things, and it just really was an interesting perspective. I'd never seen that or witnessed that. Or, I'm not saying he's the first to do it, but it was the first time I experienced that, and it was a lesson, a different way to die that I never knew about, and Bruce in a way was too, of course.
Yeah. Yeah. He either spoke with or was visited by all his brothers and sisters. He had a lot of them. I'm not going to try to remember how many they are, but we're talking 10 or 11, something like that. Um, and he spoke with or corresponded with. He would, if somebody, because there were obviously people he'd worked with overseas. Somebody sent an email. He would dictate the response, and we type it in for him, or talk to him on the phone, or um, so basically he tried to. I mean, it was pretty much, it was made public knowledge, and then he tried to speak with or communicate with uh, anyone that was interested, um, within the limits of his
Yeah,
fatigue and
yeah,
stuff like that. Um, but like I said, the way he described it, as you're putting the flowers in his hand, was a beautiful way
yeah,
to describe it, because you know people would talk to him about, once they got past the idea of it, people would talk to him about um, what he had brought to their lives, and he would talk to them about what they had brought to his. And um, in some cases he had gentle thoughts and reminders about how they might want to proceed with their lives
yeah,
moving forward.
yeah,
Uh, you know, and it's uh, I guess you could call it powerful, but I mean, when a man knows, or when a person knows they're dying, and they're saying, "Hey, man, you really need to work on this," it
yeah,
it makes an impact on you. Um, I don't know if you want to. He would joke about it and call it his dying wish. Every once in a while with some of them. So now you got to
yeah.
do it. It's my dying wish.
Well,
But anyway, and because he was paralyzed, myself or one of the others, his brother was there, his wife was there. Well, two of his brothers were there, his wife was there, and me. Um, One of us would have to, either be holding the phone, or type it on the computer, or holding it so he could read it, reading out to him, that kind of stuff. So we were all a part of it, and I think that was also powerful and important. Um, he was
right.
he was never alone, um, and I've Bruce was never alone. Um, my dad and my mom had both passed, and I was with them both, um, or one of us was with them both. Um, and when in my job as a nurse, um, in the ER, when, at least me personally, when I see somebody getting close, I try to be with them, because I don't think people should be alone. I mean, we're
Right.
we're a tribal people, um, and it is a journey, and it is a challenge. Um, Everything I've read or been taught is that the last thing to go
Okay.
is hearing. Um, so talk to them. Touch is also part of that. I usually try to hold their hands. Um, I just feel like, as humans, we owe that to each other. um, to let them know that there's somebody else there, uh, and it's okay.
Yeah.
You know, it's okay. Move on.
Yeah, you've basically been there for a few, more than I've been, and maybe more than a lot of people. And I mean, in your job, that offers you that opportunity, I suppose. But even friends, and Bruce, it was a different situation that he had ALS, and it was just a shutting. But at the same time, he picked the time and place rather than have was like an active agency even over the disease in a way, wasn't it?
Yeah, he was getting more and more infections, primarily upper respiratory infections. They were requiring more and more treatment. Bruce did not, through the whole process of his disease, the only time he went in the hospital was for them to surgically put in the tube that he breathed through once his diaphragm shut down. And so he was on a ventilator that went to the tube in his throat. Um, and it's not uncommon for folks to start to get upper respiratory infections and pneumonia and stuff like that. And so it just got to the point that um, he felt like he was either going to end up in the hospital, which he didn't want, or he wouldn't have
Yeah.
much quality of life left because of all the treatments and everything it would require. So he basically got a hold of hospice and picked a date and a time, and all his kids gathered and family gathered and friends, um, and had some time with him to talk to him and spend some time with him. And then when the date and time had arrived, hospice was there, and they unplugged the ventilator and it stopped breathing for him. So, very, very similar. Bruce's seemed to last longer because of the nature of ALS, um, but the reality was that um, it was I guess, sort of a
Yeah.
different process, um, but similar in the sense that he had that agency, and he had a computer that he actually could control with his eyes, because that was all that
Yeah.
would pretty much move anymore. Um, so he would respond to people's emails and stuff like that, up to fairly late, um, not that long before he passed. Um, so he was communicating with people and interacting with people, and letting him know where he was and what was going on and that kind of stuff. So,
Yeah, it's a road we all journey at some point, and yet I think I'm glad we took time to talk about it today, and I know that it's not an easy topic for anyone and a lot of people, and it seems rightfully so, but I think it's necessary, and it's reality, and like you said, it's been it used to be far more there like the best way it was described is like we have this a bunch of celebration, and there's a lot of activity and hubbubaloo around a birth. Everyone knows, and I mean, and that, we do have similar process with death, other than being there, like cutting the cord on a baby and seeing them right after they're born. But we've separated that aspect of death, that the final point, the final hour or day, and we're losing something in as humans. I think we're losing something in that you don't need to see this. I want to remember him as he was. I don't want to. I don't agree with that anymore. I think we're denying ourselves something that's important for our own education and our own livelihood. It's our own. I don't know. There's a spiritual component, and you, I think, could speak to that more powerfully even than me, because you've been there for that. And even who you now are as a person is a result, not just them, but even others, like non-family members and everything. Somebody's got to be there.
yeah, I would suggest too. It's definitely changed me as a person. But I would suggest too that one of the problems with the system, or the way we view death, is it's
Right.
become the enemy. All all these medications and things you can do to live longer, and even, you know, in the medical system that I work in, death is viewed as the enemy.
Right.
We need to fight against it, you know. And I'm not disagreeing with that. You know, I
Yeah.
want to save lives. You know, that's the core of my being. But I think when we view death as the enemy, we're ignoring the fact that death is a process of pretty much every living organism. It's part of the process, you know. And I think if we, as individuals, you know, maybe we can't do it anymore as a society, but as individuals, if we recognize it not as something to be feared, not as an enemy, but as something that's part of the
Right.
natural process of the living world, um, we'll do
Yeah.
better with it. You know, we'll understand it better, and we'll deal with it better. Um, you know, that doesn't mean I want people to go out and embrace
Yeah.
death or anything like that. That's not what I'm saying. But it's
Yeah.
everything dies, man. You know, and to fear something, I mean, that's like fearing gravity. You know, I mean, gravity's always there. You
Yeah.
know, there's nothing you can do about it. So understand it. You know, embrace it, use it, um, whatever the
Yeah.
right words are. But death is there. Death is there for everybody, and that doesn't mean you're not going to be sad, and it doesn't mean you're not going to grieve, and it doesn't mean you're not going to, um, you know, have terrible emotional turmoil about it.
Yep.
That's all normal. That's all part of the process too. But it's a natural process.
It's the discomfort of it is a transformational process in and of itself, and to deny it, to delay it, to avoid it interrupts the natural cycle or the natural process that would come as a result of it. And I think I'm learning or trying to learn to embrace that discomfort and not run from it, either physically in this form, in a with a substance, or with a run, or and but I'd rather feel it and absorb, let it change me, let it let the process take effect. And because it seems there's so much around, like you're talking about, like avoiding it. Like, well, here, take this. This will help. Do this. Do this. And I mean, we need some of that, of course. We don't want to like suffer in agonizing pain through the whole process or whatever, right? But I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying it right. I'm stumbling with my words here.
Well, one of the things I think we do more than anything else is we
Right.
pretend it's not there. You know, like, like as a nurse, if you die in my ER, one of the first things I'm going to do is clean your body and straighten it up before we bring the family back, right? And then the family come back and have a few moments or whatever, however long they want, and then the funeral home comes and picks up the body, and then the body goes and gets chemically treated or whatever the funeral home does and everything, and then it's presented, you know, whether it's open casket or closed casket or
Yeah.
cremated or whatever. Uh, there and and for the rest of us, it's like, okay, he died.
Right.
They're taking care of it. You know, it's over there. It's being taken care of. You know, and not that long ago, you know, like we were saying, Grandpa died up in the attic. You know, Mama and the aunties went
Yep.
up and cleaned him up while Papa and the brothers were digging the
Yep.
hole and building the coffin. And lay him out in the parlor. Everybody gets to come and touch him and talk to him and everything like that and tell stories about him. You know,
Yep.
maybe drink some corn liquor, and then they carry him out by hand, put him
Yep.
in the box, and put him in the ground. You know, physically and emotionally involved with every step of that process. Um, and you know, I'm not saying we still need to do that, but I think, you know, pretending it's not
Right.
going on, or, you know, pretending it wasn't there.
Yeah.
It's part of life,
Yeah.
man. It's part of life.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah. Well, and and sometimes it comes much too soon, like it does for a lot of tree workers, right? Where it's not even it's sudden, and even that's hard to understand as well. But it's still, to understand why our journeys are the way they are, why things happen. Like Pete dying at 32 or whatever it was. It's just that doesn't make sense either, and that was very quick, and you know it is just part of life, and it doesn't always make sense. Well, anyhow, maybe on that note, it's we never know where. I always describe the podcast as a conversation that flows like spring thaw. The snow starts to melt and a small trickle forms, and it bumps into rocks and twigs, and it changes directions, and it just continues to trickle on down. And this, our conversation today reminds me of that. And I hope everyone enjoyed listening. Maybe this is we've never got into the topic of passing or death before, but it is a part of life. And I thank you for sharing that personal information, because you were there for those men in that time, and thank you for being willing to talk about it.
Well, thank you all for talking to me. That's another part of it, is talking about it.
True enough.
Me and Tony both have talked before about how we're very good at keeping things in our little boxes, but you keep stuffing stuff in those boxes, sooner or later that shit busts loose. So.
And I've heard you say it. There's many doors in the house of Tain, but you may not want to open them all up.
Yeah, that was Paul Taylor came up with that from Arborware. Yeah, he said there's many rooms in the house. You don't want to open all those doors.
That's what it is.